All right, welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast live stream edition. I'm Matt Prehm, Eric Scopel, Jared Mack on the show today. Welcome to your Friday. If you're new on the live stream, thank you for watching. Hit that like button; it's always great. If you're listening on the podcast and you want to watch this show, just go to YouTube, Oregon Ducks on 24/7 Sports, and you will find us there. Portal Talk, because today is like the last day players can be added into the portal. The 18th of January was the last day that a player could actually go to the school and say, please put my name in there. Help that understand, like two different deadlines. Schools have 48 hours to put a player into the portal upon hearing that. So today is that end of the 48-hour window, so we should have a good idea. There could be a couple late stragglers to get in today. Wouldn't be a surprise, but we figured, hey, let's recap things now. 20 guys from Oregon's roster, non-scholarship players, entered the transfer portal. 9 of those came on defense.
Players? You mean scholarship players, right?
Scholarship players, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Walk-on. There were a couple walk-ons that did not include them. They didn't play much this season, if at all. 9 transfers on defense, 10 transfers on offense, 1 special teams transfer. Tom Snee, he wasn't with the team though this past season, but he still counts. 9 of those guys have landed at Power 5 schools. A couple of them in the Pac-12. 5 of them haven't picked a school yet, and then there's been some others that landed at places like Nevada or San Jose State. Do we want to, I've got all 20 listed out here. We'll go to the additions here in a little bit as well. But do you want me to just list out the guys that have gone? It's a pretty long list, or just the notables.
Yeah, maybe let's just run through some notables, maybe the ones that we think kind of matter. I mean, because I think when we were going through this process, how many times did we say it stinks to lose players, but so many of these players really just didn't have a role at all on this last year's team. So maybe just hit the guys that were in the too deep or who maybe fans are more familiar with.
I think the bigger names obviously would be Justin Flo would be the maybe the biggest name, but not the biggest production. Wide receiver Dante Thornton is maybe the biggest production, probably the second biggest name on this list here. And then we saw some guys like Byron Cardwell, Seven McGee, quarterback Jay Butterfield, edge player Braden Swinson, who had a really good 2021 season, but didn't really do anything in 2022. Maliki Matavao, a tight end, is gone. And then maybe the most 3 recent guys, Keanu Williams, a defensive lineman, and the 2 receivers who were going to be seniors this year in 2023, Caleb Chapman and Isaiah Crocker. I don't feel like, to recap things, we've kind of said this a couple times, but do we feel like there's any guy out here that's like program altering with their departure? I don't feel like there is.
Well, in the short term, program altering could be taken a couple different ways. Like none of these guys are like earth shattering. Like, oh my gosh, they can't replace that. But there are guys certainly who they'll have to find ways to replace because they would have had roles. Like I think Maliki Matavao is one that jumps right to my mind, and Cam McCormick, the 2 tight ends, just because you now have kind of a scarcity there with 3 guys. I mean, I think that to me, and we'll get to kind of what positions they need to address later, but that to me is kind of at the forefront of my mind offensively, at least, of like, gosh, you can't make it through a season with 3 tight ends. We've kind of, on previous shows, and I'm sure we'll do that so on this one, kind of addressed who could be an addition at that position, but that certainly stands out. You just kind of just running through the names. I mean, Dante Thornton, certainly a really gifted athlete. I think to me, from a talent perspective of kind of where the upside was, that might be the one that hurts the most. Now, I think Oregon has done a really good job to go out and address that with Trayshawn Holden and obviously with the prep additions. But I think I've always been high on Thornton's natural physical abilities.
Yeah.
We saw that in kind of up and down throughout his career. Obviously, the Utah game being the most notable, where I think he had like 150 yards receiving or 140 or whatever it was. So that one kind of stings. Defensively, I think most of the guys that left in part because they just didn't have roles. Like, I don't really know if there are too many guys that I look at and go, gosh, that one you can't really come back from. You would have said Justin Flo going into the season.
Absolutely.
But the reality is the guy just didn't really have any production. And by the end of the year was almost out of the rotation. So, I would say that overall, the 20 guys you left, there are players that I think had upside to be contributors, or guys that had a role in 2022 and probably would have had a similar role in 23. But overall, I think you feel pretty decent about kind of who you cut bait on, and then we'll get to a moment who you've added. I think you've won if you wanted to just look at it as a straight trade, which you can't. But if we wanted to look at it that way, we could, I guess.
I think I agree with Eric. It's kind of unfair to look at that as a straight trade off. Like, all right, 20 guys out, X amount of guys in. We'll get to scholarship numbers too in a moment, but Oregon still has to cut a couple more, not cut, but they have to lose a couple more guys. But the guys that they have lost are mostly strictly depth pieces, which, again, big fan of depth, always helps in your program. But nobody had a huge instrumental role this past season from game one. Dante Thornton was probably I think was the biggest guy. I think he will have a really good career at Tennessee if that's the only place he stays. I just like his makeup and his skill set as intangibles. But again, he really only got a lot of this playing time because Chase Cota went down with an injury. So it's not like he was a day one impact guy, but he was great depth for Oregon because you could rely on him if you needed, if somebody did go down with an injury like Chase Cota did. With Flo, he got injured and just never produced. Couldn't jump in the pass coverage. Cardwell is another bigger name, especially after his freshman season, after C.J. Verdell went down with an injury and he stepped in for that role with him and Travis Dye. Had a lot of expectations going into his first full season as a starter, which ended up that he was like the fourth running back on the roster. So a lot of these guys are talented, and I think whatever school they go to, they can excel and they can make a name for themselves, similar to what Trey Benson did at Florida State. I think that's my best example of him because he was the high-profile guy. He was a four-star running back out of Mississippi. He was what everybody wanted to see on the field. They never saw it. Now he's on the field and producing well. That makes me feel like that's what Byron Cardwell is going to be. That's what Dante Thornton's going to be. Guys that general fans wanted to see on the field because of their name brand value. That didn't work out here because other players were just better. They transfer and they do well at their other school. So I like all these guys who entered the transfer portal. But like Eric said, when you look at them and it's like, well, we lost some production from last year, but most of the guys who were playing in front of them or are just better players and are higher up in the depth chart are back. And they're still here and they're still playing. And then you bring in guys like a Johnny Cornelius, guys like Trayshawn Holden, Kyrie Jackson, and all these other players in the portal. And then your recruiting class. Oregon's going to be fine. It's a lot of guys on the very surface level. But Texas A&M, who we always love bringing up on this podcast, lost 25 players this year to the portal. 16 of them were blue chippers.
Yeah, that hurts.
So that's a pretty good number there. This is just how college football is going to be, which I don't mind. It's a business. It's always been a business. Now it is up front and center a business. But it'll take some time to get used to.
Not a lot of starts gone. I think
few.
The most come with Cam McCormick and Mataval departures.
They actually started more games than Ferguson, which is a fact people probably don't realize.
Yes. Defensively, we saw Justin Flo get 2 starts, before his departure. Don't really see anybody else on this list of guys that started.
Thornton started.
Thornton made a couple starts,
Thornton had a couple starts.
That would be the extent of it, I think. Yeah, I mean,
4 guys. So like we're talking 24 positions, 12 games, 288 potential starts, and we're seeing roughly 20 starts of that be gone. So like Eric said, Jared said, depth hit, but no like real starters beyond McCormick and Mataval departing here. We should note Oregon did add 9 guys, and this is also a number that could change because the portal's all confusing. We're all figuring this out as it goes, but the window to enter the portal, it has passed. But that doesn't prevent guys from committing to schools if you're already in the portal. So this number could, should, will likely grow between now and May 1st when the second window to enter the portal opens up again. And it'll continue to grow probably until June, maybe even later than that. Oregon has 9 guys. Jordan Birch is the highest rated of the 9, a 4-star edge player from South Carolina. Was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. Evan Williams, a safety, was an all-conference player for Fresno State. He has not been rated yet. He's in line. If you're wondering why he hasn't, he is in line. Connor Stoll is another linebacker from ASU. Same thing, hasn't been rated yet, but he is in line. Tez Johnson, the adopted brother of Bo Nix. He is a 3-star transfer recruit coming from Troy, their best player. And then you get down to some 4-stars with Johnny Cornelius, Junior Angelau, Trayshawn Holden, Justin Jacobs, all of those guys coming from either a Power 5 school or, in Cornelius's perspective, Rhode Island, but was like viewed as the top offensive tackle in the portal. And then there's also Kyrie Jackson, who came from Alabama, a 3-star cornerback. So nine additions here, 20 departures. I like what they did. You guys can give a better assessment because when we go to practice, you guys have responsibilities of kind of really honing in on offense and defense and personnel and whatnot. So you guys can give your opinions on ads here, but I like the group of 9. I would always take more edge players, more offensive line type guys, but I don't know if that's 100% needed or if it's even possible because of scholarships like Jared said. We'll get to that here in a second.
Well, I hate to say this. I think a lot of things are possible in terms of additions still, and because okay, Matt laid out for us. Is it 90 right now or 91? What's the scholarship count? What are they over?
They are currently at 90, and I think I figured it out. Off record here, up behind the camera. We've been debating. Our numbers are a little bit different with James Creppy, the Oregonian. Luke Basso is the one I'm like. I don't list as a scholarship player. I
didn't realize he was a scholarship player either. I'm as big of a special teams guy as you get.
And I think that's the one. Player? I don't think he is.
No way, right?
Jared, he was. Yeah. He was not. He was in our walk-on draft. Someone took him in our watch. James is cramming the numbers here.
James, I know you're listening because you listen to everything.
So we're at 90. Okay. I've got Oregon at 90 guys. 14 of those are seniors. 28 of them are juniors. 7 of them are sophomores, and 41 will either be true freshmen or redshirt freshmen.
Well, I mean, just to start, the way the classes are split up is kind of untenable with the sophomore and senior classes being like nothing, and the junior and freshman classes being like, what, 60? Was that 68 of the players? Like, I mean, it's like 3/4 of your roster. So that'll be something to broach at some point. No, but I guess back to the numbers thing I was talking about before we kind of got sidetracked with the scholarship math of. You mentioned adding edge players. I think Oregon can continue to add players. I don't think there's really any question. Now, for every player you add, of course, you have to lose more. And I think it's pretty easy. And again, I don't even know how many times we want to go through this exercise, but you could look through this roster and pretty easily identify 6 to 8 more players that probably aren't going to have a role or haven't at least proven to this point in their careers that they will have a role going forward, right? Or should, or just doesn't seem like they've proven that they can yet. So, Oregon could. I think we're going to talk ads maybe in a moment. So I don't know if we want to jump into that too quickly. But you're right, like Matt. I think they could add edge players. I think they could add. There's a couple players in the chat, or at least one I've seen that mentioned that has tied to Oregon. That would also make sense. That'd be Ole Miss. I guess I'll pull it up from was it Trello? That'll be Ole Miss safety Tashim Johnson. I think that's the name to perhaps know. There's been a little bit of
rumor is he's here on campus this weekend.
I was going to say, yeah, there's some rumor that he's making a visit, so that would be a name to know. Like Oregon is still very much actively looking to add. I think adding an edge player could make sense, but to add an edge player, you'd certainly want to remove an edge or defensive lineman from this roster because, again, those listening to the podcast probably sounds like I'm beating a dead horse here, but they have so many scholarship players on their defensive front seven that's where like almost a third of the roster right now is comprised. So at some point, if you're going to add there, you have to lose players there, which is why adding an edge player feels weird because you've already got 30 players in your defensive line. I mean, I think I'm exaggerating at this point, like 25.
D-line and edge is 25. You're not very far off, Eric.
It's not far, yeah.
It's 25. That's where you get into the weirdness of this. But yeah, Oregon could continue to add, and I wouldn't be stunned at all if they go and if somebody hits the portal who's a really high-end edge player who's maybe proven to have, maybe he's got 20 career sacks or whatever, and he's sitting in the portal and it's unexpected. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Oregon makes a move for it. But at this point, I think the scholarships are at where maybe if you're going to add there, you're going to undoubtedly subtract from the current group, and that's probably going to happen regardless of who you add. Because I think if we do the exercise, which again I hate to do, it's kind of not a lot of fun, but you could pretty easily point to several guys on the defensive line that would make sense to leave.
Yeah, but it's just how it is, and you look at these kids and.
All right, Jared, let's do it. Name them all. Name them all.
Sure. You want to actually go through it? I'll go through it with you. I'll put my name out there on these kids.
Matt, do we actually want to do this? I don't know.
Anyways, Dan and company just continue to add guys.
I mean, sure.
And eventually these guys are going to look at the roster and say, all right, well, I'm probably not starting over these people. And maybe it's just because of talent, or maybe it's just because Dan and company like their profile more than other guys. Like, I don't know, I kind of look at it how Jordan Riley and Casey Rogers both started last season over guys who were in the program before, like Keon Ware-Hudson. And I really like Keon Ware-Hudson as a player, but maybe someone that Dan brings in as a recruit or a transfer just fits their profile way better than what's currently on the roster. That's why there's 6 or 7 remaining players from the class of 2021, Oregon's all-time highest-rated class in history. There are 6 or 7 players remaining from. That's why there's only a handful of sophomores on this program. That's what's going on. I mean, it's not as steep as what Colorado's doing and bringing in 40-plus players to the program and just kicking half the roster off the team, but it's getting there. It's in the 30s now for Oregon.
36.
36, yeah.
37? 37.
36 or 37. It's getting there. But this is what is happening. I mean, this what Dan runs is now completely different to what Mario Cristobal ran. And if hypothetically, if Dan were to leave, and I don't know, Jim Harbaugh were to take over at Oregon.
Hey, wow, what a
there
win.
you go. I'll give a good name. The roster would look completely different with Jim Harbaugh than it would with Dan Lanning or Mario Cristobal. So this is just what's going to happen. And I mean, we can name names if you want, but there are plenty of guys on the defensive front that you could anticipate getting into the transfer portal eventually. However, must I remind you that this does not need to get down to 85. The scholarships do not need to get down to 85 until fall camp begins. So Oregon could go into spring football, theoretically, with 117 guys on scholarship. They just need 32 of them to leave by the end of spring football. So I kind of anticipate that's what Oregon is going to do. And it'll create a lot of a lot of storylines, a lot of headlines from us. I'm sure all 3 of us will have one headline talking about Oregon is at 93 scholarships. What are they going to do? But I think Dan has it fine. I know that a lot of people do not really like the idea of having this many players on scholarship, especially when it's over the budget. But it's just what's happening. There's nothing you can do about it. You have to have faith in Dan to actually compute the numbers, or his staff behind the scenes. But that is what they are paid to do. So I think that they know what they're doing.
I mean, I don't think we're calling anybody out when we say guys like Michaela Fisi, Trevin Ma'ai, Suavi Poti, and Keon Ware-Hudson. Like
Jake Shipley.
Those 4, like, you just go and look at, hey, look, Oregon added like 12 guys that could play your position or some kind of near your position group this offseason. And that's a stark call to those 4 of you need to get better because we're bringing in a bunch of dudes that play your position, and the cream's, the cream's going to rise to the top here. And I'm not saying all 4 of those guys need to leave. I'm not saying all 4 of those guys will stay, but when you recruit that many guys at that position group, that's like a clear sign to those returners that, hey, like Dorless is gone after this season. Taki's gone after this season. Casey Rogers and Popo both gone too. Like, they don't need to worry about the freshmen because they're gone. But for you 4, and you probably could say Jake Shipley in this group as well, there's a large group of guys that play your position that are coming into the program. And if you want to play here, you need to get a lot better. Because they don't add as many guys as they did if they felt like the upperclassmen are here and are going to be dudes. Like, they don't add that many guys. They add some for sure, but they don't add like 16 guys at D line or edge.
Yeah, no, I think, I don't know. Keon, I might separate slightly from that group because he was in year 2 deep last year and played quite a bit.
I would too.
And actually PFF, I think, had him a higher grade than a lot of the guys up there. But Shipley, I think, was out for that question in that group. And Afaese and Pody, like, they were hurt this year. You could get a situation where those guys choose to medically retire. I don't think that's totally out of the realm of possibility, just in terms of like what's the future of their career, or they hit the portal. I just don't see either of those guys having a future here, and it's kind of strange that those are 2 names I just expected you'd already have in the portal. And I hate to give up on my guy Trevin Mai, because anyone who's listened for a while knows I'm leading the bandwagon there. But I just don't know what the role is going forward. He was your backup to Brandon Dorless. Maybe he can maintain that this year. We'll see, but I just don't know if the production's been quite there yet. And then Shipley is a guy who played a lot in the bowl game and actually had some kind of nice moments, but I also think in terms of just the body type and the athleticism maybe is kind of lacking, but we'll see. Maybe we'll be wrong on that, but that group there makes a lot of sense. If you want to go into some of this more, we could talk about, I see another name here from Trello, which is Avante Dickerson in the secondary. That one would make sense in terms of this is a guy who literally wasn't dressing on Saturdays for home games, didn't travel to any of the road games, like just basically didn't have a role on Saturdays. So I'm surprised, frankly, he hasn't hit the portal. Darren Barkins, kind of a little bit elevated in terms of he was actually playing a little bit this last year, but I don't think there's any question he's behind 3 to 4 guys, depending on the development of Kyrie Jackson and Jaleel Florence and all those guys. So those are some more names. Offensively, I don't know how many there are, to be totally honest, because even though we talk about how the defense needs to improve and et cetera, the offense has fewer scholarship players. Like, there just isn't as much, quote unquote, and that's the wrong term, but fat to trim. There isn't just as many players you can move off of because your depth would take a hit, like we've already seen at tight end. So I've seen Josh Delgado's name mentioned here. I guess, right? Like, that could make sense. I just think you currently have, I think it's 9 scholarship receivers, and you get down to 8, you better be adding at that point. And better be adding, because you can't play a season, I don't think, with 8 scholarship wide receivers. So we'll kind of see on that one. But no, I don't know how many more names we really want to get into, but I think we've identified some of the ones that made sense. And frankly, some of the ones that we were really anticipating are the most recent ones. I think the Isaiah Crocker, Caleb Chapman, Keanu Williams trio were all ones we were kind of anticipating, and those hit the portal. Oh, I guess another one, just Damon David, would also make sense. He was in the portal last year, just to come back. His role this year was largely special teams, barely played on defense. I don't know what his role going forward would be, especially with the additions they've made at his position, right? Like, they've gone out and added Evan Williams. They're in on Deshaun Johnson. Does he really have a role going forward, especially because he didn't have one this past year?
Yeah. I think those are all the names that we listed. Not that if we wanted to list, because we just did. But for Damon David's sake, again, a guy that wouldn't be surprising. Offensively, I agree with Eric where there are maybe some guys that you could see, but I don't know what the scholarship breakdown is in front of me, but it's a significant amount more for defense than it is for offense in terms of just pure scholarship numbers.
Do you have that, Matt? How many scholarship offensive
gotta
versus
be like
defense?
do it really
50-30.
quickly.
Yeah, give us a count on that.
Give me a second.
For a while, it was really lopsided, and I don't know.
Oregon has 52 players on the defensive side of the football, and they have
Should be
38.
Should be 38.
35 on offense.
Oh, special teams included too, right?
Yeah.
The 3 special teams guys.
There's 3 specialists: Luke Dunn, Andrew Boyle, and Camden Lewis.
Right. 35 guys on offense.
It's not a lot.
It is not a lot.
You're literally playing 11 of those guys, and the other 11 are in your 2 deep, so there's just not as much to cut.
Right. So I don't know. Oregon continues to add defensively or looks to add defensively in the portal. Basically every day there's a new name on defense attached to Oregon and Dan and Coach Hampton, who's going out and recruiting now. I just find that interesting because, it's very clearly lopsided in terms of the scholarship distribution. It's all defense and very little offense, yet Oregon's few offensive additions this year have all been offensive linemen and wide receivers, which obviously helps, but tight ends, I think there was a question earlier in the chat from Fish Bio. Here it is. Only having 3 tight ends with 1 true freshman is a problem. We need 2 more, right? Yes, I think they need 2 more. I think they need, if they were to land Nicholas Harbor's talents, that'd be great. I still believe that they need another tight end. I don't think that having 4 scholarship tight ends with 2 of them being true freshmen is the way to do it. I think you need at least 1 more guy to have some depth and some experience. He needs to be your Cam McCormick role. He needs to be your Patrick Herbert role, which right now is your second tight end, who's a guy who's extremely injury prone and just played his first season last year. So I just think you need better depth there. And I know Kenyon Sadiq is really good. He's a human highlight reel on his high school tape. This is college. We'll see. There's another comment in our chat here that said, stars don't lead to success on defense, just like our starting linebackers stunk. That's true. And I could take that same narrative and bring it to Kenyon Sadiq, who's a very, very talented and high 4-star recruit. We'll see what it looks like at the collegiate level, but that's why I think they need at least 2 more tight ends. So that's where I see them adding on offense there, a wide receiver, but I don't know, man. The numbers just are strange for the defense to offense in terms of distribution. I'm not sure I get it yet. Maybe Oregon's defense will be fantastic next year, and we'll figure it out. But
if they cut 5 on defense to get to the 85 hypothetically, and it's 45-35 or whatever the numbers end up being, I can't remember. I think I did that wrong clearly, but if the 5 remaining players that left were all on defense, the numbers would end up looking a little bit more reasonable. But I'm in total agreement right now. You kind of look at it and go, "Gosh, this is kind of weird." And it reminds me of maybe this is bad financial advice, but my financial planner was like, "Don't worry about your stock stuff. Don't spend every day looking at it. Don't stress about it. Just kind of maybe look at it once or twice a year." Maybe that's the advice for the scholarship math of don't look at it every single day thinking it's good. Oh my gosh, we're at 90 right now. Look at it when it matters. Look at it. It's not that the numbers don't matter, but the people in charge of this are going to get this figured out. So those sweating the numbers maybe don't sweat the numbers.
And something that we haven't talked about yet, and we haven't really talked about in a very long time, because the school has done a tremendous job, whether it's Mario Cristobal before Dan Lanning, or if it was Helfrich or Chip Kelly, was if they signed a guy, he got into school. There was no worry at all about a player not getting into school. Not heard anything, and this is where it's unfair to throw this out there, but maybe there's 1 or 2 guys that they're saying, hey, we took his commitment. He looked good in September to get into school, and he didn't take care of his academics. And now he's put himself in a bind where he's going to have to really work hard the next 4 months, 5 months to graduate, and not only graduate, but get admitted into the University of Oregon. So maybe there's a guy on this team or 2 on this team from a commit list that Oregon just knows, like, hey, it's probably going to be unlikely he gets into school, so we need to add another guy, because they're never going to come out and say,
right,
this guy didn't get in.
That brings us to this kind of point, which I thought was interesting from the Sturdy 21. Is it possible that they are also working under the assumption that some 2023 recruits will come into spring camp and either want to go closer to home or don't jive like they thought they would? We're not saying that could happen, but that's another way for scholarship.
It has happened at Oregon.
Yeah,
who was that running back from like North Carolina?
Jamal Elliott. And then there was the same cycle, I think, or maybe it was the year. Yeah, I think it was.
Defensive lineman from Tennessee.
I was just going to name him Rutger Reitmeyer, who was my first. I did a long feature story with him about how great his time in Oregon was going to be, and he transferred.
Lasted all 10 days.
I don't even know if I think there was a break in spring, I think, and he wasn't there when we got back. So it's like, all right, well, that didn't go well. And again, we're not reporting that there's any sign of like, oh yeah, we're hearing that so and so is really kind of questioning their decision, but that is also part of the human element, and that's right. And identifying that of, shoot, who knows? Maybe the way they get to, they get down a scholarship or two is there's a guy who just doesn't pan out from this cycle, whether it be academics, whether it be something off the field, whether it be they get here and they're not comfortable staying here, etc. So there are other ways to kind of, I don't want to say creatively get there because those wouldn't be intentional, but there are other ways for the numbers to kind of work themselves out.
It's tough to rely on those, though.
Oh, it sure is. Yeah. You're not relying on those. I'm just saying you're opening. That's a possibility of if you go into spring at, let's say, 88. Let's say they two more players go or whatever today, hypothetically. Maybe you get to the end of spring.
100%.
Oh shoot! Now we're actually only at 86. That's easier to manage.
Yeah, I was just going off the question where it's asked if it's possible they are also working under the assumption that you can't do that. You can't work under the assumption that someone's just not going to like it here. They might. I mean, it's going to be in the spring, so it'll be nice and sunny. They won't get to see December yet, but you can't operate under the assumption that some guy's just going to jump ship. And if you are, I think it would behoove somebody more who's already transferred into Oregon to just jump right back in the transfer portal. Because if I were Oregon, I'd rather have a guy who has 4 to 5 years of eligibility left than someone who has 2 to 3, even depending on talent, obviously. But 4 to 5, greater than 2 to 3. So if you were operating under that assumption, it would be better even if it were a transfer portal to jump ship after a week after they're not liking living in Oregon or not liking the team, whatever. That's it. It's just hard to operate under that assumption, even though it has happened to Oregon in the past.
I was just going to bring something up, and then it slipped my mind. Shoot. This is great. This is great podcasting, by the way.
It's great. It's also great in conversations when this happens, when you're like, oh, yeah, I had a thought. Now I don't have the thought. So regardless of if it's being recorded on a podcast or not, it's not fun to forget what you're thinking.
Guys that are enrolled at Oregon, we know it's like 30. We haven't confirmed all 30, but I do think every single transfer is here. That would be 9. We've confirmed 14 high school enrollees. So that would be 23. So we're working on trying to figure out who the other 7 guys are that are on campus right now for Oregon. And part of this is transfer era portal playing. But Eric, you mentioned this to me like a couple of days ago. Of like, holy crap, 30 is a lot. Even 23. Like 100% confirmed is a lot. I mean, that would be 7 years ago, almost your entire recruiting class getting on campus early. That is a large number, and it gets guys into the program and the weight room program, which they've started now, their off-season preparations sooner, which it's going to make spring practice for all 3 of us, and I know in particular Eric, he's just going to go crazy with all the new numbers, all the new players. The new roster is going to look totally different.
My favorite time of year. It'll be fun sitting out there with the guys, familiarize myself with all the faces so I can take attendance every day. No, and you're right. And if it is 30, we'll add 7 to the freshman class. Now you've got 21 out of 28 that are enrolled or something like that's because Dan said 15 was the spring number or about. They get to 21. That's crazy because I think 14 is a school record in terms of most early enrollees for spring football, as far as I can recall. I don't think there were many before I started doing this about 5 years ago, and certainly in the 5 years I've done it, I think there have been a couple of years where it's been 6 to 8, but 14 is a lot. And I think that is going to be one of the trends you see here maybe is seeing players enroll earlier. Not that that's a new trend, but I mean, the rate to it, and maybe it's a one-off year, but the rate of which Oregon has, moved from players being signees to being enrollees is much quicker and much greater in terms of just the pure size and quantity of it than we've ever seen before. And I think it's going to pay pretty large dividends. Now, one thing I was thinking about last night, I don't think Oregon had a single true freshman start a game this past year.
I just closed that tab of all the stats.
I don't think so.
Starts. I don't think so.
I'm pretty sure that's true because I was kind of in charge of the true freshman deal.
Yep.
That's a really interesting kind of storyline to follow with Dan here. I know it's 1 year sample size, it's one class, so it's really not even enough data to really draw any conclusions. But I'll be curious to see after 2023, is that going to be a trend where we go, oh, Dan recruits these guys, they're really highly rated. He says over and over again, if they're good enough, they're old enough. But does he feel comfortable actually giving him starting roles, right? Like that's going to be something that's interesting. And when you have so many guys enrolled for spring, right? I mean, it at least paves the way for them to have enough time to develop into that sort of situation. But I just thought that was interesting last night. I was kind of thinking about it. Gosh, the last time anyone started as a true freshman, you'd have to go back to Mario's final season. And I was trying to think of even who that was who started some games back in.
Was it Troy?
In 21. Yeah, it would have been the Troy Dante Thornton combo in the bowl game. Both started. Jackson Powers Johnson started on defense in the bowl game. So I guess you wouldn't have.
Oh yeah.
It was a weird year. But anyway, just a thing to kind of monitor. It was we're talking true freshmen. I had thought of that last night because somebody had asked me on social media, like if Oregon does land Nichols Harbor, maybe we can go into this conversation of like, does he start day one? And I kind of thought, no, I don't think so.
No.
I think Terrence Ferguson is your starter this year. And in general, starting true freshman doesn't happen very often. And that got me kind of down the thought process of who started last season? Nobody started all last year. So maybe this is a thing to track in 23 with landing of does this guy ever start true freshman? Is that something he does?
I mean, it might be depending on what the depth is at a certain position group. Just I don't know which true freshman would have started last season, to be honest with you.
Right.
Maybe Connerly just because he got the most amount of time, but that entire offensive line came back from a season ago. So I don't know.
A lot of it's situational, and as I said, there's such little data. But I mean, like it's going to be something to follow with Dan of like, hey, who's going to be the first guy to start as a true freshman?
I don't know.
Eric, it's not only just.
Uh-oh. There goes Matt again.
Okay, I wasn't sure if that was just my screen where he was froze.
No, what I was going to say is that. Like you said, it's entirely positional dependent. If I were to guess which true freshman could start this next year, probably Jurion Dickey, just because that's a limited receiver room. And if some guy goes down, that could be just an immediate, hey, we need to get somebody in there and also Dickey is very talented. He can do that kind of thing.
No, you're right, though. I'm just going through the positions. That would be the one that would make the most sense unless Sadiq ends up winning that job over Ferguson or Harbor, but that's not going to happen barring injury.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know. Sadiq is such an interesting body type in a tight end room that I could see them like maybe having a package where his 6'3", his bigger body, like that could be a start. But I don't even think that'd be a start. I think that would just be a package. Like they wouldn't come out in that two tight end set.
They could
like
though,
that.
because it actually goes back to the fact that Ferguson started 6 games last year, and yet he was by far their most snapped tight end. But I think Mataval and McCormick each had like. I want to say, again, it's been a little bit since I've looked at this. You might have seen McCormick more recently because I think you wrote that story. But I think those guys each started like 6 or 8 games, something like that. Because they had
McCormick started 10 games.
Was that right? Yeah, I knew it was a larger number than
transfer story. It was a lot. But the reason he started and the reason Maliki Mataval started where they were good blockers. They're just better blockers than Terrence Ferguson. So I don't know. We'll see what Will Stein wants to do. Should we Should we take a break?
Let's take a break. Matt is, I believe, coming back right now. So Matt can lead us in after the break.
Okay.
All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. I don't know what happened there. I just blank screen, bomb, everything gone.
You were saying, I was mentioning the true freshman thing, and you said, Eric, it's not even true. And then you were gone.
You were gone.
Well, I was going to say it's not even just true freshmen that didn't start. Out of again I can't remember the number. It's 12 times 24. 288 potential starts this season. Only 34 of those were given to true sophomores.
Yeah. And that was a lot of Troy Franklin there. That's like all Troy Franklin starts and some Ferguson, Matavel starts. Yeah.
Yeah. So not only did the freshmen not play a lot, the true sophomores didn't play a lot either, or at least start.
Just saying, we've got a trend here. We've got a little trend here with Dan and young guys. He's the Rick Carlisle of college football coaches.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
That's a reference of Rick Carlisle notoriously never played rookies. Anyway, who cares? It's an NBA reference nobody's going to get, obviously. Sorry, my bad.
I got it.
I did not get it, but I'm not the biggest diehard NBA guy like you two are. So, do we want to talk what comes next, or we want to dive into the chat?
What would come next? I'm interested to see what it is that is coming next.
Well, I mean, there's the second window, and I think I think from a spring perspective, we don't have spring dates yet. But what I've been told is they're floating around the idea to have either most of or all of spring practice completed by the start of the May 1st window to transfer.
Yeah.
To give the staff and the players a clear idea of where they fit on the depth chart. And so I think there's going to be that next wave of departures, and it's probably going to be coming in May. And that's where I think, you go into spring football, and maybe this is a topic we flesh out in more detail later on, but there's going to be a lot of guys to watch that either makes or breaks their time here at Oregon. Whether that's setting them up as a role player in 2023 and then they expand on that role in years to come, or it's this is their last chance. If they want to play at Oregon, this could be their last chance. And, that opens the door then for transfers, which is where it's going to come from.
So, I've been kind of thinking about this spring of, I know it's not going to be exactly this, but there could legitimately be all right, we've only got so many spots available on this roster. I know you can't do this quite like in the NFL, but because you can't make last cuts, quote unquote. But hey, if you think you're deserving of a spot on our roster, go prove it in the spring and play really, really well. And there's maybe a couple of guys where that's where they're kind of at and why they haven't hit the portal, because they think that they're capable of going out and proving to the coaching staff that they deserve to be here longer, even though maybe the coaching staff has some doubts. I don't know. But Oregon will certainly go into spring, barring a crazy Friday afternoon here where just everybody hits the portal over the number. And that means there will be players on the roster who still have to make decisions after spring. And ultimately, I imagine how spring goes will make some determination on some of that. The other thing somebody floated to me a couple of days ago was it's also possible players who haven't finalized their academics will want to graduate and go through spring football to then finish their academics and then hit the portal, which could make some sense in terms of finishing their undergraduate degree. But just another thought in terms of why players might stick around a little longer. That was made by somebody who pointed to a pretty prominent player on the team who hasn't apparently finished the undergraduate degree. And that's something that this person had heard was a possibility. So another thing to maybe just kind of monitor in terms of why is a player sticking around through spring who ends up hitting the portal.
Yeah, and this is what I was referencing earlier, where I talked about Oregon going into spring camp with 117 scholarships. This is normal. After some quick research, I did this yesterday. Georgia, I think, went into spring camp last year with 93 players on their scholarship roster. So this is just what happens. It's going to be natural attrition. It's going to be kind of like what Eric mentioned in the NFL, where they have last cuts, where you get into competition with guys, and when it's clear that this player is not as good as this player, then the player who isn't as good usually hits the transfer portal. That's interesting, Eric, about the scholarship, or not the scholarship, but the finishing of graduating and finishing the degree. I'm sure that has a lot to do with it too. I know that a lot of these guys take classes in the summer to stay in Eugene and work out in Eugene with the correct facilities. So they take a lot of summer classes as well. I don't know how that graduation process would impact Oregon's scholarship distribution, but maybe that'll have something to do with it too. But then again, the transfer portal window is closed at a certain date. So I would imagine if Oregon goes into spring with 94, 93 scholarship guys, I wouldn't worry about it. But there's also the whole entire other transfer portal period for Oregon to add new players. So that's the other side of it, where it's like, all right, well, probably these guys are going to leave the program if they're still here in the spring. And Oregon's going to get at 92 scholarships regardless, because they're going to add a bunch of new players, because now they know exactly what they do or do not need.
It's going to be like men's basketball, where like Dana always held a scholarship in case there was a guy who wanted to transfer like in the spring. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Maybe Oregon is always like, we're going to be at 84. We're going to like assume we're at 84 just because we want to make sure we can maybe add a guy or two after that second window. I don't know. There's so many pieces that are moving here where you're trying to figure out kind of how all this comes together. And even though we've been covering this for a long time, this is all brand new to us in terms of the way all this is going to play out. I mean, these rules this year are literally in their first. This is the first time we've had these different openings and windows for portals. So it's tough. It's wild.
There's some discussion in the chat about starting at corner. Yeah. And there's too many people to throw in here. It's not really one question, but I think we should discuss this because we've seen Kyrie Jackson and Jaleel Florence. We've seen Jaleel Florence and Tricos Bridges. Dante Manning got a lot of starts this past season. Or played a lot this past season for Oregon. And we'll go way more in depth on this as spring gets closer. But I think this is one of the position groups where there is a lot on the line, even for the returners, because who starts? Gonzo's gone. Bridges was solid to good in some moments and was pretty poor in others. Manning was the same way. But I don't think you can definitively say like anyone should be the guy at the position. And so there's going to be a lot of – I think this is what makes spring so fascinating for people like us and the diehard fan is that there's going to be like legit position battles. Like they won't decide who wins, but this is where it starts. And this is one of those position groups where there's going to be a lot of movement, a lot of trial, and a lot of competition to see who elevates.
Yeah, I think assuming Quez is playing corner, which I guess is an assumption in of itself because it's possible he moves to safety, but the fact they've hit safety so hard this offseason, or it looks like they're trying to, makes me believe maybe they just feel like they're comfortable with him there. I think Quez is just one of your starting corners. Now, is he your top corner? I don't know. He hasn't proven it yet, right? Like Gonzalez was clearly your number one guy this past season. It wasn't even close. And I thought Quez played really well down the stretch for the most part. Maybe had a couple of errors here or there, but I thought played pretty darn good. So I feel comfortable penciling him into a starting lineup. The other one, I agree. Like there's three names like off the top of my head that make a lot of sense. Kyrie Jackson transfers from Alabama. He has some starting experience in the SEC, physically gifted. Makes a lot of sense that he would be somebody who could push to start. But then you also have two highly regarded former recruits in Dante Manning and in Jaleel Florence, who were kind of battling all season this last year to be your number three corner, right? Kind of maybe doing a little bit of a dress rehearsal, if you will, to get a full-time role in 23. So those are kind of the four names to me that stand out. I don't know if there's anyone else that like maybe a Jaleel Tucker, same class as Jaleel Florence. Tucker didn't play at all this last year. Maybe he has a really strong offseason. This is a really highly rated recruit as well and develops. Like that could happen. But I really think your two starters are coming from the group I mentioned before. And I guess, I don't know, I'd probably lean Jackson or Manning just based upon experience levels at this point. Manning was the most highly regarded as a prep recruit, as a former 5-star, just hasn't quite figured it out yet. So those would be the names to me at corner that stand out. And I guess if I'm doing it all in pencil, I'd probably go Quez and Dante Manning, which makes me think I'm in a time machine to last year when we were talking about those guys as being these breakout players in the secondary. And yet Dante didn't end up winning the job, and I would say had kind of an underwhelming season based upon expectations we had in spring that he was going to take a big leap.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this is, at least right now, we haven't seen anything, so we won't have any idea of what it really looks like until spring practice starts. I think it's Bridges and Jackson, and I think that Florence and Manning battle for that number 3 spot. I think Jackson is the most experienced one of everybody but Bridges. I think Bridges, if he stays at cornerback, is clearly fine by Oregon standards to be a cornerback. He starts, and then Jackson is just an elite athlete who played well in his limited snaps at Alabama. I think that type of athlete doesn't come around here often. That type of cornerback who has that size and skill, and then also understands how to be a cornerback. I think that's a huge asset for Oregon. I think that's the problem with Manning and Florence during their limited snaps, is that cornerback is an extremely hard position to learn. I think that's why Trikweze Bridges in his first year from moving to safety to cornerback got exposed a lot, is that he just has to learn the position through experience. Manning, I'll start saying it again this spring. I think I could see him make a jump. I just don't want to give up on a player like that who has that great of size and just pure athleticism.
He has all the intangibles. Right?
He has every intangible you'd ever want for a quarterback. He's tall-ish. He's got really long arms. He's got quick speed, quick feet. It just comes down to functionality, and it comes down to learning the position, and it comes down to technique. And eventually, if those things all click, he could be good. We haven't seen any of them click yet. But I will not sell my Dante Manning stock. I will keep it. I think he could be a big challenger to Kyrie Jackson, but for now, I think in my brain, I think it's very clearly Trikweze Bridges and Kyrie Jackson as the starting corners.
What do we make of the fact that Tysheem Johnson and the interest that Oregon has? Because I think that tells us they're still not comfortable yet with what they have at cornerback. Safety?
Yeah, he's a nickel safety at Ole Miss.
Oh, that's right. I'm getting the other guy that entered the portal confused. But even then, as safety. Yeah. Even then, though, the question still stands. Like, why would they go after Tysheem Johnson? I understand he's going to be a sophomore and he's got plenty of years left of experience, but
yeah,
like you've got Steve Stevens, Brian Addison, Jamal Hill all back. Evan Williams is joining the fold.
Yeah.
And yet you go after this guy. That tells me like they're not comfortable yet with the depth or the talent that they have at the position. Or maybe this guy's just widely better than everyone on the roster. You have to go after him.
What I think is that he's a pure nickel safety. That's basically all he's played during his college experience at Ole Miss. Mm-hmm. And he's really productive too. He had 78 tackles this past season, 8 tackles for loss. I think he 3 or 4 passes defended. Grades very well on PFF. Grades very well with the eye test when you watch games with him playing in it. All those safeties that you listed, Matt, are all free safeties. Those guys don't really have a lot of experience playing nickel except for Jamal Hill, who rarely played it this past season, even though going into the year, Coach Joe Lorig said that he's a nickels coach for Oregon. He said that, we'll be splitting Bennett Williams and Jamal Hill mostly, and that just didn't happen. Jamal played free safety on the left or right side of the field, kind of split that time too, and Bennett Williams played nickel safety, except when Christian Gonzalez played nickel corner. But Tysheem Johnson is just a pure nickel safety. I think Oregon is going after him because they need one. They need one pretty bad because Evan Williams, as good as he is, he's a good free safety. Brian Addison, as good as he is, free safety. Steve, free. Jamal Hill, free safety. They just don't have a pure nickel safety other than J.J. Greenfield on the roster. And Greenfield is still a walk-on for all we know, assuming that he hasn't been given a scholarship yet. And I like J.J. Greenfield. I think he's funny. I think he's kind of good when he gets in there to play. But you can't rely on that for an entire season. And Tysheem Johnson is good. I really like him. He's good tackling in space. He gets downhill. I think he's a really good safety. I think Oregon, if they can get him, they'll make the scholarship numbers work.
And that was what I was going to be. We're going to have similar answers. My point was going to be, remember how difficult it was earlier in this week when we were talking about the starting secondary of, okay, you got the safeties, but who's really going to be your nickel? Because nobody really returned who played there. Tyshim Johnson would be somebody who makes some sense to fill in there. And from a pure body type perspective, 5'10", a compact, 200 pounds, like that adds up for what you want for a player playing in the box as well as maintaining some coverage responsibilities. So sign me up if that would make some sense. But then I also kind of go like, gosh, now you're really carrying a lot of those deep safeties. And at some point you're kind of going like, it's one of those guys, maybe they're all going to plan on coming back, but one of those guys is going to be the quote unquote final cut and hits the portal after spring. I don't know, but you are going to have certainly a glut of deep safeties, like 4 guys who basically are borderline starters who are going to be on this team. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because they really struggled with that position. So having, as Matt has said several times, the cream rise to the top at safety, I think that makes sense. If there's a position to bring in a couple extra guys and let them battle it out and maybe have some turnover after the spring, that would be one that would add up for me.
Do we feel like the safety room's improved from what it was last year?
Yeah, I guess.
Well, at this
it's
point,
the same as it was last year.
I feel like it's the same.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, is Evan – we don't know Evan's better than Bennett. That's the only real change.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and they bring in Turner and DeCambra, so I guess I like that.
Those aren't contributors probably, though, more than likely.
No, but I guess I like that there's more than just like one true freshman on the roster that's a safety. There's now 2, so it's double it. But, yeah, well, until we see how good or not good Evan Williams is at the Power 5 level, I guess it's up in the air.
This question is interesting. Are there question marks on Drew Maringer with all these tight end losses? I don't think there's questions on Drew Maringer because both the guys that departed, well, I guess there's 3. Terrell Tillman, I don't really count him as a tight end. He moved out of
you have to, though. I mean, he was a scholarship tight end, so you got it. But I understand your point. He didn't play.
Like, he didn't play, but he also probably didn't play tight end if Spencer Webb didn't pass away this past season. But his departure would have happened probably anyways. Cam and Maliki both left, I think, because like they knew like Ferguson's the top guy at the position. While both those guys started more games than Ferguson, like he was the guy that got the most targets. He was probably the guy that played the most snaps. He was the focal point, and he's coming back. And when you have 3 guys that are capable of starting at a Power 5 or a Division I school, it's hard to keep all 3. Like unless they know, like, well, you know, I've got 3 years left and this guy's got 1, you know, he's gone. So I don't think there's much to worry about with Drew Maringer with the current departures. But had they not landed AJ Plagmino of South Medford or North Medford High School in the 2024 class, I would have started getting concerned because Riley Williams went to Miami from the 2023 class. Joey Olson from Lake Ridge, another 4-star tight end, went to USC. And if they had lost AJ to another school, you had 3 tight ends that were all elite players at that position in 2 classes and you didn't land 1. That would have been a big mistake, a big concern. But they got him. They got Sadiq as well. Now, if they get Nicholas Harbor, like I think there shouldn't be any concern about Drew Maringer as a tight ends coach.
To the departures, I just think you look at what the expectations both players had, and they were both probably not going to align with the realities of what was going to be at Oregon. And with Maliki, he wanted to be in a little bit more of a feature role. And if you're, and probably and have maybe some commitment that that's going to be the case for a couple of seasons. Whereas Cam is looking to basically audition to prove himself to play at the next level. And my understanding is he wasn't thrilled with the number of pass targets he was getting in this offense. And if you go look at the numbers, he really wasn't targeted very much here. Go to another school, maybe that changes. Maybe in Miami he has an opportunity to be a little bit more of a featured part in the pass game. But you look at –
I was going to say, Mario, he loves using his tight ends, right, Eric?
Oh, he's a huge fan of throwing the ball to tight ends, baby.
Yeah, you know it.
But no, I just think you look at what their expectations were, and they probably don't align with what the reality was going to be. At the same time, I don't want to give him a total free pass for losing 2 of your 3 guys who were playing big roles. So like, if this continues to be, this is the same point I had earlier on. Like, I think there's such minimal data right now that it's really hard to draw any big conclusions, which is why I'm not sure if Dan is opposed to playing true freshmen, or if, as Jared and Matt kind of discussed earlier, turns out there just weren't situations where true freshmen were going to get an opportunity to start. I'm also not ready to say, oh gosh, Drew Maringer keeps chasing off tight ends because they lost 2 in this year. He could go the next 4 years without having a player transfer out at tight end, and you'd be like, man, Drew Maringer is awesome at retaining his players. Like, I just think it's too small of a sample size, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on. And if it becomes a trend of every year, you're like, well, gosh, why is every good tight end they sign transferring after 2 years? That's the problem. Then we can have that discussion, but I think it's premature to point the finger that way.
Yeah, I don't see there's any reason to blame Drew Maringer. Like, absolutely none. I know that he lost Joey Olsen. Is it Joey Olsen?
Big Joey.
Then it's Logan Olsen, but Logan is a baseball player. Riley Williams moved to Miami, so happens. Pugliano is a really good 2024 prospect. You land Sadiq, you're in the running for Nicholas Harbor. This is a guy who recruited Drew McCoy originally to Texas way back in the day before he's now somewhere. I don't think he's any longer with USC. This is a guy who knows how to recruit. He loses 2 tight ends. It's unfair to judge him that people from his transfer or from his position group entered the transfer portal, because that's what happens to everybody. We could all yell at Dan Lanning because he lost 20 players from his team who entered the transfer portal. But we went through 25 minutes of saying why we're not going to yell at Dan. So for Maringer, he just got to keep doing what he's doing. Like Cam and Maliki leaving, it is what it is. I mean, I would have liked to have seen Maliki play this upcoming season, but for Cam, he's not going to get any targets here. He's not going to get any targets in Miami. He's a really good blocking tight end. That's his best skill set. We saw him occasionally catch a pass, but Terrence Ferguson is way better at it. Kenyon Sadiq is way better at it. And I don't know, maybe then Patrick Herbert seemed to be better at it too, given his 49-yard touchdown run, or touchdown catch. So I'm fine. I don't think there's any reason to see negatively about Drew Maringer and his position group.
Nolan Drebbing, do you think Dowdell, James, or Lamar could take the number 2 spot from Washington? We've said no on that.
Whittington.
Previously. Whittington, sorry. That blended my next question. I was going to turn this into, do we think Dowdell or Lamar could kind of surpass Jordan James? My first reaction is no.
Well, and no. to the first question from Nolan, we actually answered this on a mailbag not too long ago, and we all pretty. Is that the one, Jared, where you called the question asker dumb or something? Is that the one where you?
Whoa, hey, no! I said that was a silly question. It was never needed to be asked again. Please.
Was that where you just completely maligned our listeners and said that they had low IQs and that they should, stop?
Jeez.
Yeah, for everybody who's listening, please don't ever ask us a question again. That's that silly.
No, but I also
sarcasm, by the way, people.
We're also big. Jared also never said exactly that. He said you did kind of question the question, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure.
Yeah, but no, I think Matt did a good job of reframing the question, because I think we've already established we don't expect Whittington to lose that role. If he's not the number 2, it's probably due to injury. The Jordan James one, I could be convinced that Dante Dowdell comes in and is already a large human being at 6'2", about 210 pounds, spends the offseason getting closer to 220, and is just physically developed enough to challenge for the short yardage goal line role that Jordan James had this last year. Like, I could certainly be convinced that that's an outcome that takes place. I would be surprised if Jaden Lamar wins that role. And again, we also have to recognize, I think Carlos Lachlan makes a lot of the personnel decisions, but Will Stein might also be a coach, offensive coordinator, who's like, I would prefer just to keep Bucky and Noah in short yardage, and you take away that role, and it's really only 2 players you're playing. Like, there could be different philosophies for how they use running backs, but if we're assuming there's going to be a third running back who, like last season and even in previous years, remember with Cyrus Sibivilikio, who will be kind of your short yardage goal line guy, then yeah, I could be convinced Dante Dowdell could eventually overtake Jordan James, but I wouldn't bet on it. Like, I think Jordan James played really well in that role. And frankly, I know Dowdell's taller. Jordan James is just as physically developed, and that lower body. Like, Jordan James is a really bulky runner. And I really kind of appreciate that from a short yardage perspective of, you don't necessarily need a tall guy. Like, sometimes the lower body strength and kind of the leverage you can get is better for a player who's a little shorter and more stockier. So I could be convinced it's Dowdell. That wouldn't stun me, but I would still lean with James being more likely to be the short yardage guy if that is a role this year.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if Dowdell takes over that position. I thought James did a really good job at it last year. I know that there was very short yardage situations, but towards the end of Arizona and towards the end of during the North Carolina and the Holiday Bowl game, you saw Jordan James out in the open field, and then you're like, oh yeah, that's right, he can do that. Very talented running back, and so is Dante Dowdell. I mean, I look at everybody in that running back room, and they're all competing for the number 3 spot because Bucky Irving and Noah Whittington are those guys. And maybe Will Stein has a goal line running back. Maybe he doesn't. This is a completely new offense. We don't know what it's going to look like. Maybe he's very traditional and just QB sneaks everything that's third and short or fourth and 1, which I would really appreciate. But yeah, I'm not going to say that Jordan James can't be dethroned from this position by Dowdell or Lamar, but for now, I would just keep riding with Jordan James, stocky guy. Like I like Eric's point where it's like it's better to be kind of short and stocky and run through. That's why Noah Whittington, even though a lot of people for some strange reason don't think that Noah Whittington is any good, that's why Noah Whittington, when he throws his weight into somebody because he's short and stocky, they go flying and he just keeps running. So I like that about Jordan James. It's why my theory that Derrick Henry is a very poor short yard running back is because he cannot create enough inertia and momentum because he's so damn tall. So I like the shorter running backs and the shorter goal line scenarios. But for now, I still want Jordan James as my third down back. We'll have to see Dante Dowdell. Maybe he's just comes in. He's like Mark Ingram. He's like the Hulk and just destroys people. But we'll see. I'm excited to watch him because his tape is phenomenal. I love it.
Can I ask something to the chat? What's going on with the Noah Whittington?
I
people
get it all the time.
It's crazy.
I get it all the time. It's strange.
I don't know.
I don't get it either. He's good. He's like over 6 yards a carry.
Yeah, I mean, he was. I don't have the stats in front of me, but there was like a 3-game stretch. It felt like that he was putting up better numbers than.
Yeah, no, there was.
Bucky was.
It was up until like the Oregon State game, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got one thing here to address maybe, and then we call it a show. Matt, is that fair?
Yeah.
This is going to be quick because I think it's worth the question from Trello. Will Justin Jacobs be available this spring? With the injury, which was I believe a knee injury he suffered. I can't remember if it was their second game. Right, it was early, first or second
week 2 against Rutgers,
sometime in September. I would be surprised if he's full participant in spring. I would imagine you're looking at him being full participant at some point in fall, depending on the severity of that knee injury. But that could be wrong. We'll have to kind of poke around and get a feel for that one. But that's a good question because I haven't seen that really brought up a lot. But that my understanding was when they signed him or when he committed that he was going to not be available right away.
I'll be interested to see if he is because I don't know. I mean, we'll have to do some digging about what's his health status. But like Matt said earlier, all the transfer portal guys are enrolled on campus, so he's there. It'll be interesting to see if he is healthy by spring football because that would really help Oregon's linebacker development if they get him in and get him learning the system on the field, not just through the playbook, just immediately. Because like I've talked about him before, I really like his play style, what he could add to Oregon's defense.
It's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for watching the live stream. Remember, go onto YouTube and you can find us there. Oregon Ducks on 24/7 Sports. like that channel, subscribe to that channel. It's awesome. And if you're listening to the podcast and audio is your way to go, thank you for doing that as well. We appreciate that as well. Until the next one, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.